And next we have Bhavin, Kamani, who's going to talk about lies, damn lies, and estimates. Please welcome.
Okay, I'm Bhavin Kamani. I'm an independent agile coach. Some of you might know me for sure. So I'm primarily going to talk about estimates, and they are our favorite subjects, right? Right? Cool. So are the estimates lies?
Absolutely.
How many of you say estimates are lies?
Absolutely.
Not absolutely. Or somehow I don't know why correctly. Okay. Estimates to my mind are more like illusions, right? They are like these pictures, which spirals, which, you know, when you look at it, it kind of gives you a feeling that it's moving. It's actually not moving, right? It's still. Right? It gives you that sense of, you know, really that, oh yeah, I've done estimation, I've done my job, now I have some plan, you know, project plan, and I have a roadmap, and, you know, probably I'll be successful, right? Are estimates required? Hello?
Yes.
Who are customers here? Ask any customer, are the estimates required? Can you hire anyone, and let's say a carpenter or someone, which is the first question you're going to ask? How long? As a customer, two things most important for us, right? For any service-oriented jobs. How long? How much? Right? So, if you ask any customers, they're going to say yes. That's what we live by. You ask any service providers, which all of us are, and we hate it. Right? We would love a project where we need not do any estimates and we can still live by it. Right? Cool. So this is a Dilbit cartoon you would have seen many times, right? About estimates. Now, one thing which I just want to know, I would just like to highlight here is, this is a typical conversation that typically happens no matter, even if customer would have seen this Dilbit cartoon, right? But there is this one thing where, you know, you come back and say, you ask any of the service providers, and you come back and say, how long? You know, ask a carpenter how long it's going to take. And if he says 5 months, he typically will exaggerate, right? He's going to go back on his gut feel, and he is going to exaggerate, and you are going to push him down as a customer, right? You're going to come back and say, oh, you know, it'll cost 10 million. Oh, it's too high, right? Push it down, right? So it's a place where no more it remains an estimation, it becomes a sort of a haggling, kind of a negotiation exercise, right? And here's the interesting part. It's over a work which nobody has any clue about. Neither the service provider nor the customer, right? So it works in a lot of scenarios, like, you know, you want to build a table, you want to, you know, do up your houses or things like that. It works actually, but particularly in software projects, the failure rates with regard to estimations are very, very high. Right? So it's a little peculiar about the software projects. Right? So this is the second cartoon which I wanted to, you know, highlight. As a matter of fact, being agile, talking about Scrum, all of that stuff, I've seen umpteen number of Scrum Masters in my life who ends up spending the whole time doing planning, scheduling, estimations, and all of that stuff itself. There's hardly any work for execution, hardly any time for execution. Does it happen? How many of you are actually project managers here? Scrum Masters? You see that happening? How much time, you know, you end up spending on planning, scheduling, whether we like it or not,
1 day for the month.
1 day for the month, that's a good case, right? A smaller team, a smaller organization, it's okay, but bigger organization,
It is not.
it's impossible, right? And the feeling that you get is, oh, Scrum, Kanban, it will come and go. This is going to remain. Isn't that true, right? And here's a problem. It all starts with a simple problem. It always starts with, I have a very simple project. It's just 2 plus 3 equal to 5, or 1 plus 1 equal to 2. Correct? You go to the customer, most of the time it's a very, very simple problem that he has. Is that true? How many of you concur?
Everyone.
But, what's the reality as you get into it? It's a beast. Right? There's this whole complex web of things which were never told to you earlier. Isn't that true? Right? So here's a challenge for all of you. This is the estimation challenge. And provide me with 90% confidence, or even 60% confidence will do. Okay, fine, 50% will also do. Alright? How old am I?
Oh,
How old am I?
within a range of 42.
Okay. People have got into ranges, right? Good.
That's obviously.
Just Scrum guy. What's the size of the largest sea turtle ever discovered? How many of you have any clue about this? Do you get projects like this? Right? How many bugs will you have in your next project? And what's the total volume of the lakes of the entire world? These are all like superb questions, right? Do you guys want to attempt to make any estimation here? Not even attempts, right? Why? Even with 50% confidence estimates, what are the chances that you will go wrong? Probably first question you may not, right? The rest of the 3 questions, the likelihood increases.
Second may be possible if you know it. Third and fourth is like super disaster.
Out of the questions, right? Right. So that's also a problem with most of the software projects, right? You've been asked for estimation at a time when you have very, very little information about the project. Literally. It's actually a time where you have so little information, and even if the project is ongoing, you may be new. You might not have complete awareness about the context, right? Even, when you don't estimate, you ask estimates from your, teammates, exactly the same problem, right? And so, they do become live. Not intentionally, but it ends up becoming a lie, right? So these are really, I felt, important laws of nature pertaining to estimates. Parkinson's law, how many of you know it? Most of you would know it, right? If you give a person 5 days to deliver a task that could be delivered in 4, the person will find something to do with that extra day. Right? And that happens. So how many of us have prepared for our school exams, class exams?
All of us.
Right? And that's where the student syndrome strikes. Right? If you give too much time, people naturally procrastinate. So when do we start actually, preparing for our exams? Way too early?
9 o'clock morning after exam.
Yes, absolutely. You flip around and say, okay, let me just figure out what are the topics. We have speakers, right? How many of us really started preparing for our slides? I just saw a speaker who's just creating the slides. Right? It happens. Right? We procrastinate. We try to make it as late as possible, right? That's human. We can't, fight that, pretty much. If you have a team, you can't expect all of them to change. Here's my wonderful speaker. Cool. And the last one, which how many of you know about this one? Exponential aggregation error. So this is basically the more fine-grained estimation you try to seek, the higher the chances that it will be error-prone. Right? More fine-grained. I want in seconds, I want in hours, I want in minutes the estimation. Chances are very high you will go wrong. Right? And these are laws. These are not something which are, and that's why they are called laws actually. These are proven. You can't fight them.
That's what the client expects.
Blame it on client.
That's another one.
Right? Right. So how many of us really still end up doing man-hour based estimations? Do we all do estimations whether we like it or not?
Yeah.
We do, right? How many of us actually end up doing man-hour based estimations still?
I do both, actually.
And how successful are those?
Over a period of time, it is successful because they know over a period of time this may take this much of time, but not on the initial time.
So how do you know even that you are successful?
Delivery, yeah, on time.
Plan versus actual?
Yes.
Yes.
Plan versus actual, right?
Yeah.
So my quick question to you is how difficult it is to even measure man hours?
It's the tedious.
It's impossible. In fact, I would come back and say it's impossible. I have, I've worked in large organizations. We have tried number of ways in which if we can, measure it through some automated gadgets and things like that. It's just impossible. In fact, it's completely futile exercise.
There's an algorithm to calculate. That's fine.
Yeah, I mean all algorithms and all, people have, I think it's not me, I mean people have tried this like n number of times, right? So the problem with man-hour estimations, again I would come back and say, is really measurement. It's very difficult to measure, extremely difficult to measure, right? You guys still do it, all the best. This is Scrum Shop. I would have expected more people to go with this. Story points. How many of you guys do no man-hour estimation and just story points? Track your projects based on number of points.
No, I do both actually.
Okay, you do both. Great. And you say, one day? Okay, great. So that's nice actually. But okay, how many of you actually do story point based estimations? Okay, I mean. Don't let me know your preferences, right? Your preferences obviously is no estimation, right? Okay, but whatever, organization compulsions, customer compulsions, whatever it be, you want to do, estimation. You have to do estimation. So you end up doing story point estimations. And are these story point estimations acceptable to the customers?
No.
How can it work then? So you still have to do some high-level estimation to your customers, right?
Yep.
Is your customer in line with story points?
Yep.
How many of you? Just raise your hand. I mean, okay, few. So most of you do story point estimation. That is more like coveted operation, right? Coveted operation,
Kind of
right?
ranged.
It should tie back to some effort estimation.
Correct. So somewhere, some mapping has to be there to effort estimation, and that is what is given finally to the customer. Is that true?
Yes. For a customer, what we do is like we will give it as a t-shirt sizing, which is again a story point. Where the yes means it would take 10 days to 20 days.
Some mapping is there. Some algorithm is there. Some seeking of algorithm is there,
They
right?
will be like,
Okay, Excel 10 man days.
Yes.
Right, let's just put it.
yeah.
Customer has to pay you money, right? And he pays you money based on what?
What we are saying.
Man days. He cannot pay you money on story points. Otherwise, you will have 1,000 story points, 10,000 story points, right?
And we actually say it is a guesstimate, not an actual estimate. There's
It's
lot of
all
words.
fine. It's
Lot of
all good marketing
Yes.
actually, right?
Yes.
But in reality, we end up doing some sort of a mapping, right? So that's fine, good. And the last time, how many of us do cycle time based estimation? Can you guys raise your hand? 2. Interesting. Cool. And why so? Only 2. So tell me something. And this is something that I truly believe in. If you go and ask your customer, it's going to take 10,000 man hours for this project. What does it mean to him? You can calculate cost, right? That's fine. But does it answer his question? Is his question really? We had 2 questions, right? How long? How much? How much? Okay, 10,000 into, say, whatever, $30, whatever, right? I know the cost of the project, right? But what about the second question? How long?
Not sure.
Never answer.
10,000 man hours, I can spread it across 10 years, I can spread it across 1 month, right? And that's what is important to the customer, I think, right? You go to a restaurant, order, you come back and say how long it's going to take. The guy comes back and says it's going to take, 1 man hour of, 1 person. Is that an answer that is acceptable to you?
Oh God.
How long is duration, time. That's all I require. Right? And to me, that's what customer is really looking at. He is not looking at man-hour-based estimation.
No, I think both are important. Because I think without cost, feasibility of the project is questionable.
That's fine.
And once it is feasible, then yes, the question about timeline comes up. But without cost, if you just go to the customer and say, only 6 months, fine, you have an answer, but he still doesn't know how much it's going to cost.
So I'm saying what is important to the customer is cost, not man hours. Really.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm a customer, I'm not bothered about how long it's going to take. Whether it's going to take you 10,000 mans or 10 people member team, that's not my botheration. This is what I need to do, and tell me the cost. Right? Because customer is not managing your project. Right? So that's more like an internal calculation. That's not an external calculation. So to a customer, how long, how much? Simple. Right? And you derive how much based on man hours and all, that's separate. Right? And cycle time is something which really helps you arrive at, right? Which is duration. Right? And the funny thing is, in software projects, most of the time we never end up actually tracking that.
Isn't that the release planning kind of thing? Isn't that the release planning?
It's again release planning. Whenever a plan comes, estimates comes.
Yeah, based on some assumptions. That
Right. And here's the interesting thing about cycle time. So let me go to the next slide. How many of us have actually created cumulative flow diagrams?
Used it. I using Jira. Yeah, Jira and DFS.
Right. This to me gives you
More clarity.
the truth of your project. This is what the truth is. This is not estimates. This is how the project is actually running. Right? And this is where it basically rubber hits the road. It actually tells you how long it is taking right now. Right? You do 2 weeks of work, or probably just 1 week of work. Can you create cumulative flow diagram out of that? You can, actually. Right? With 1 week, you will get to know how long it is taking. Correct? And that data is far, far more important. It's answering your question that your customer is looking for. Right? So typically again, going back to when estimations are difficult and when estimations are not so difficult. Going back to those questions, how old am I? It's a slightly easier question. Why? I'm a human being, right? With my height and various characteristics of my body, you can sort of gauge based on your past data. right? Saying it should be roughly around this much. But when you have absolutely no idea, you have no data, right? Estimation is just guesstimation. Absolutely. It's not even guesstimation. It's like
Throwing a ball.
shooting in the dark,
Throwing a
literally,
ball.
without being trained. Right? So you need the data. The more the data you have, the better your estimates will be. Is that pretty clear? Right?
So even when you do story pointing, that's what you do, right? It's relative estimation. You
Absolutely.
keep a story in front of you and gauge how much this story is comparable in that view. So you are doing a relative estimation.
True.
Comparison with something.
But story pointing is fine, and I'll tell you where I use it. I do use it. But where I use it, I'll let you know. But one problem with story point estimations are, your customers don't buy it. It doesn't help you answer the question, your customer has. You end up still doing that mapping exercise. That 10-man days, you still have to give him that answer. You can't give him 1,000 story point as an answer or 10 Excel size stories as an answer. That's not acceptable to the customer. That's how it is. That's real, right? You may end up getting a customer who can buy it, right? And he is a customer who trusts you, right? There is a rapport with you. You have completely a stranger, a new customer, brand new customer. There's no chance that he's going to take story points. And even to the guy who has a trust in you, he'll still come back and say, okay, can we get into duration, right?
But based on the team velocity, I can get to a duration also.
True. So I'll get back to some problems with some of this stuff in real life, actually, right? Story point is interesting and good, but in a completely different way. In fact, I would not even include that as part of my estimation exercise. Right?
What you suggest is you take cumulative production of the customer.
No. This is for you to arrive at estimation. This is what your capability is right now.
So you get the cumulative production only when you start the estimation.
When you start the project, 2 months or even from your previous projects.
So what's going to be your answer to the customer initially?
It just is a data that you have, right? So that just helps you arrive at better estimation, right? And that's duration we are talking about.
Isn't that a case that you come to a story point, especially for the team who is going to develop it, but then based on the story point, let's say somebody is rating a higher story point, you kind of psychologically with the previous experience that could be 8 man hours or 16 man hours, and then probably bundle it up and then let your customer know that okay, this is what the duration, the cost and things like that.
So I'll certainly answer your question in terms of where I feel story points are very relevant, actually, right? And that's my next slides. We need guidelines. Right? Whenever we have a tough problem and whenever we have something which is, every day we are fighting towards it, right? Conflict management, estimation is one of those tricky point, right? Essentially, which is a cause of conflicts between customers and organizations and teammates, right? And team members, right? So you need guidelines. So, and there are there are a whole lot of guidelines on estimation, right? From very, very procedural to very, very, pretty much saying no estimation, don't do estimation, it's useless, right? So here are my guidelines. This is like a summary of my own experience. This is what I do. I'm sorry about the slides, somehow it's not working out, but don't estimate if you cannot measure. And that's a problem I have with man hours. Right? If I can't properly measure it, or it is too difficult for me to measure it, there's no point in estimating. Alright? That's one thing I like about cycle time. It's easier to measure. It is difficult. It takes definitely an effort. But from my experience, it's much more easier to measure than man hours. Okay?
But cycle time is not what they usually follow and what the delivery manager says that okay, I've done this type of project. So this type of projects take so much cost with so many months. Okay, I'll finish, coming to the client 6 months with so many millions of dollars and give you the product. Then
that is way too high level, right? Cycle time talks primarily about stories. What is my cycle time of story? So one requirement, right? It's like, I place an order in a restaurant. So how long it's going to take for that one particular order?
Yeah, but when you're having a new client, he has no trust with you. He don't know how you are going to do. So someone has to come pitch in, say that okay, we have this experience, we have done this in past, so we do this.
No, that's all fine. I'm not talking about, okay, that's anyway you're going to do it. Right? That anyway you are going to do it, and you're going to talk about, you're going to give him something, and even for any new customer engagement, that there is this honeymoon period, right? That first 2 or 3 months, right? Where both the parties are checking out each other, right? And post that honeymoon period, what happens is you have enough information about the project, and customer has enough information about your capability, right? And that's when they come and say, let's talk now. Right? And we end up doing pilot projects and things like that, right? Essentially. The whole idea is in that honeymoon period, you want to understand really that whole cycle time piece. And that's a very nice time to actually draw up the CFDs. Right?
Also, most of
And-
the new customer don't give them bigger projects.
Absolutely. I haven't seen a customer coming back and giving you a $100 million project. You'll always start with a small pilot project to test the waters, right? Essentially. The second point, which I feel is extremely important, is breakup of stories over granular estimation, right? That's really the crux of your confidence, right? Can you break up stories? Can you break up requirements? And when I talk about stories, primarily I'm talking about requirements, right? To answer your question, this is where I feel story points plays a very important role, right? Within the team, when somebody comes back and says, I have an Excel, I think this story is Excel, all he is giving you is an indication that, boss, this is too big to be done, right? You've got to break it up, right? So story point, I would come back and say, is more than an estimation. It's a very, very good exercise to break up stories, right? It strikes a great conversation among team members. It has a lot of this, what we call it as, the other sort of a soft benefits, right? But again, the whole idea about story points as estimation, I have found it completely futile. Because again, it goes back into the algorithm, the mapping, and that is a completely, who knows, can an Excel be always 10 man days? Very difficult, right? Two Excel can be completely different, right?
It is a general psyche that at the moment of a bigger requirement comes up, then there is probably a person for me or somebody with breaking a stories. But if the project has a large requirement, I'm going back to your point, what you're saying, that gather more data. It becomes very difficult to make it as more granular and cut it into a smaller stories, because just the problem statement that create a solution for the banking where loan can get calculated, or the interest and everything. Can be n number of things can go within that. So to gather more data and splitting into a smaller piece which can help.
So the point is, again, even if you don't do estimation, you have to do breakup. You don't do breakup, your team members are lost, right? Every single day they have only 6 hours or 8 hours to work, right, essentially. So you have to get either there is a special task or the whole team, anyone, right? Breakup of stories is very important. A lot of times I feel there is no focus on that, right? You put your heads into it, believe me, it's a simple science. It's not that complex, right? It's much simpler than doing guesstimates, right? And the last one. Yeah, just one last thing, and then I'll get all this question part, right? The other piece, which is again very important, is create a very strong definition of that. Right? This is another thing, right? Where when we take estimations or man hour or all of this stuff, it's very siloed, right? Okay, development is going to take this much time, testing is going to take this much of time. You know how much deployment is going to take? Sometimes I've seen projects where it's almost more than development plus testing. Right? Deployment is a completely different animal altogether, right? And when your customer talks about it, he says, okay, fine, your testing is done, your development is done, but oh, I haven't got it. It's not in front of me. My users are not using it, right? So you need that very strong definition of done, right? Most of the time, the definition of done are very, very weak. They pretty much includes development testing, right? It's not end-to-end. It's not right from where do we begin and where do we end. right? And all of this thing kind of has to get into your CFD, right? That's what is a reality, and that's what is a good idea about the whole cycle time is, right? That's pretty much what I had. Again, questions. I'm time out, so I'll take one question. Yes.
We're talking about breaking down the story, but most of the time, practically what happens is customer says story, when you do story point, okay, this is a big story point, we can, if you want, we can break it, but still I need the delivery by this big end. That's what it is. Then what is the use of breaking the story?
You break up. So good part of breakup stories are, it's easier to convince customers that this part, it's possible, this part, let us take it out, right? And most of the customers, let's put it that way, they are not there to set you for a failure.
Yep.
Because if you fail, they equally fail, right? So the whole idea is that's a nice time for you to, negotiate and come back and say, so breakup of stories kind of helps you a lot in those areas. And we do it actually, in fact.
Yep.
It's not like we don't do it. We don't do it in a very, structured fashion. We do it in a very, sort of informal fashion.
The main point of story points is actually not nothing to do with estimation. It is more to trigger a meaningful conversation between the engineers
Absolutely.
and the business. And then more meaningful, more collaborative discussions. It gives a better clarity which could influence potentially your actual effort estimates if you really do it faster.
And again, effort estimates, that's a problem, right? Essentially. I haven't seen, it's just impossible to measure it, and it just doesn't give me an answer which I can go back to my customer, right? Essentially. So I would typically use story point estimations for, story point exercise, not call it estimation, exercise for breaking up the stories, but I would have the CFD. That gives me the real, what is reality actually, right? And that's what is a missing piece that I see right now in the industry. Thank you. Any more questions? I'm available across the day, so you can talk.